Greetings. Welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It's Saturday, February 22nd, 2025. On Saturdays, we look into sports and a bit of humor. Now, as you probably know, international sports can be fraught with political tensions, such as, for example, the U.S. boycott, along with 65 other nations, of the 1980 Summer Olympics that were held in Moscow. The Soviet Union and most of their allies returned the favor by boycotting the 1984 LA Olympics, 19 countries in total. And the most tragic case at the Olympics, of course, involved the 1972 Munich massacre, in which 8 members of the Palestinian militant group Black September kidnapped Israeli athletes, killing 2 right away, and then the remaining 9 athletes during the Germans' failed rescue attempt. Now, an interesting irony has emerged, however, if we consider the historical connections between 2 hockey games, both involving the United States, that were held almost 45 years apart to the day. The first was the incredible Miracle on Ice, the game in the 1980 Winter Olympics held in Lake Placid, New York. The U.S. was hosting the heavily favored Soviet Union at the time, who were the 4-time defending gold medalists, and they played them on February 22nd, 1980, during the medal round of the men's hockey tournament. For those keeping track, again, I'm posting the vlog exactly 45 years later on February 22nd of 2025. So 45 years ago to this day, against incredible odds, and the ongoing Cold War tensions between the 2 nations, the U.S. squeaked out an improbable upset victory, winning 4-3. They entered the 3rd and final period, trailing 3-2, but they tied the game with a power play goal at the 8:39 mark. And then Mike Ruzioni notched what turned out to be the game winner with exactly 10 minutes to play, the longest 10 minutes of hockey probably in U.S. history. At least it felt that way. But the U.S. did indeed hold on and ended up with that miraculous 4-3 triumph. So they didn't clinch the gold medal, by the way, with that particular game. They actually then had to go on because the tournament was held in more of a round-robin format, and they ended up clinching the gold medal only once they beat Finland in their next game, or their final game. And they were trailing Finland 2-1 entering the 3rd period as well, but they won that game 3-2. And so, yeah, they ended up with the gold medal. So, and it was not just a victory over their political rivals, though, that made the difference. That is beating the Soviet Union in the previous game, because from a broader standpoint, that particular game, or at least it was voted by Sports Illustrated to be the greatest moment in sports history of the 20th century. So that's the kind of significance the game had. If you fast forward now to February 20th, 2025, that's when the United States played Canada for the hockey championship in the finals of the 4-nation face-off. Now, the stakes aren't nearly as high, or the teams were not nearly as unevenly matched as that 1980 game between the former Soviet Union and the U.S., but nonetheless, we can at least highlight or remind ourselves that this is a game as well that's being held against a backdrop of a certain degree of political tension between the 2 countries. And of course, the U.S. and Canada have been staunch allies since the 19th century. They've been each other's top trading partners and best friends, really, if you think about it, for decades. Yet, heading into the game, the political tensions have been rising between the countries, in part due to the fact that the U.S. has threatened 25% tariffs on their Canadian friends. That was narrowly averted, at least for the month of February, because in last-minute calls with the United States President Trump, the Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau agreed to reinforce the country's border with the U.S. and in efforts to clamp down on migration and the flow of the deadly drug fentanyl. But that's not the only issue that has stirred up some resentment and some tension amongst Canadians. President Trump has, as some of you may know, has repeatedly mused, including Thursday on social media, about making the U.S. Making their northern neighbor and closest ally, the U.S.'s 51st state. Trump posted on Truth Social that he would be watching the game, and his White House press secretary added, "And we look forward to the United States beating our soon-to-be 51st state, Canada." So that's what that's the current context. And by the way, the latest polling indicates that only about 15% of Canadians have expressed any support for the idea of joining the U.S., at least formally as a state, while the overwhelming majority oppose or strongly oppose joining the U.S. Interestingly, more Americans oppose than favor the idea as well, but that hasn't deterred the president or his followers from needling their Canadian neighbors. And so the subtext of all of this involves a remarkable series of developments with respect to U.S.-Russian relations as well, which have warmed considerably under President Trump, or between the Russian President Putin and President Trump. And so while the Soviet Union no longer exists, the Cold War has obviously ended, Russia has continued to be a long-standing, formidable, ideological, and strategic foe. But that's been changing, again, especially with the re-election of President Trump and the negotiations between their two countries about the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which Trump has most recently blamed on Ukraine, in effect. So anyway, my point is not to delve further into the politics, but rather simply to highlight the recent shift in political rhetoric, the implied threats to Canadian sovereignty, and the frustrations that many Canadians certainly feel that has led to kind of a resurgent nationalism north of the border. And that wasn't lost on Canada's hockey coach, head coach John Cooper, as I'll explain in a moment. And by the way, finally, prior to the game, President Trump posted the following on Truth Social the morning of the game. "I'll be calling our great American hockey team this morning to spur them on towards victory tonight against Canada, which with, quote, in caps, far lower taxes and much stronger security will someday, maybe soon, become our cherished and very important 51st state." He added, "I will be speaking before the governors tonight in D.C. and will sadly therefore be unable to attend, but we will all be watching, and if Governor Trudeau would like to join us, he would be most welcome. Good luck to everybody and have a great game tonight. So exciting, President Donald J. Trump." In Truth Social, quote. Now, as for the actual hockey game, it was, as President Trump had anticipated, an incredibly exciting and an entertaining game. The game was tight throughout, with teams tied at 1 after the first period. Each scored a lone goal as well in the second, so the teams were tied at 2-2 entering the third period, and then no team was able to find the net in the third period, leading to the overtime. In the overtime, sudden death overtime, Connor McDavid, the star of the Edmonton Oilers, scored 8 minutes and 18 seconds into OT to lift Canada over the U.S. to win the championship game. Again, this is in the inaugural Best of the Best tournament at Boston's TD Gardens. And, just as important, Jordan Bennington held the U.S. team to only 2 goals on 33 shots. And I want to return to make a comment about him in just a moment as well. But he was certainly a star of the game, although I think McDavid got the top honors for his game winner. But anyway, you would say to yourselves, normally we would think, oh, well, it's just a hockey game, right? What's the big deal? Well, in Canada, Sportsnet reported that 10.7 million people across the country watched on Thursday night. That's just over a quarter of the country's entire population. And remember Canadian coach John Cooper? Here's how he described what happened after the game. He said, specifically, quote, Canada needed a win, and the players bared that on their shoulders and took it seriously. This one was different. This wasn't a win for themselves. This was a win for 40 plus million people. And the guys knew it, and they delivered, end quote. So I'll leave a link, by the way, to the highlights if you haven't had a chance to look at them. But what an amazing game. So, and then after the game, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau responded with a post of his own on X, quote, you can't take our country, and you can't take our game, end quote. And when asked then about Trudeau's comments, Trump responded to Fox's Brian Kilmeade on Friday with the following. He said that Trump, he claimed to have congratulated Canada on their win, although I wasn't able to find his actual comments online to confirm that he did actually congratulate the Canadians, but we'll assume that that's the case. But here's what he actually said to Kilmeade on Fox News, quote, we won the first game. By the way, that's correct. The tournament was again a round-robin affair, and the U.S. beat Canada 3-1 in their first meeting. But then Trump continued. The second game was a great game. We could have gone either way. Justin's a loser, always has been, and he's just a guy that really doesn't. I think he's done a very bad job for Canada. Justin's sort of a nice guy, but he's a loser. End quote. Well, whether you agree with Trump or not with respect to Trudeau, there's one indisputable fact that cannot be ignored. That is that Canada defeated the U.S. men's hockey team 3-2 on Thursday, February 20th, 2025. But from a true sporting perspective, the game easily could have gone either way. The U.S. had some golden opportunities. They could have easily won the game in overtime themselves. But remember Canada's goalie, who I mentioned a moment ago, Jordan Bennington? He made some unbelievable saves to keep the Canadian team alive. And Bennington, by the way, fun fact, was born in just a month before my oldest son, Lucas. So Bennington was born in July of 1993 and raised in Richmond Hill, Ontario. Again, not far from where we lived. But again, just a small aside. Now, the point in general then would be that, as Canadians, we'll certainly take the win and the bragging rights, at least for the time being, because next time in the next tournament, the U.S. could just as easily win, obviously. But let's hope that the good sportsmanship ultimately will prevail then in sports arenas, regardless of which team wins, and certainly in our respective political arenas. And here's one final issue to consider on a somewhat lighter and personal note. As some of you know, I became a Canadian citizen, just 2 weeks ago, officially, after being a permanent resident here for about 33 years. However, I'd applied for my Canadian citizenship early last year, or long before the U.S. election. In fact, even before the final slate of candidates. Trump hadn't even been formally nominated yet on the Republican side, and then Biden hadn't yet dropped out to be replaced by Harris on the Democratic side. So none of that had even happened. So I just wanted to make it clear I chose to get my citizenship for non-political reasons. In a nutshell, my wife's Canadian and our 5 sons are Canadian. And so after all these years, I got tired of being marginalized in my own family and household, the proverbial outsider. And I figured, well, if everybody else in my family is a Canadian, I should be one as well. So that's that story in a nutshell. But even better, I now have dual citizenship in both Canada and the United States. And so, if needed, I think I'll be able to step in, or at least I could step in and broker a peace between the two countries, if it comes to that. And I guess to do that, I'd start in Canadian fashion and the U.S. Shares this tradition as well. I just start with a barbecue in our backyard, right? So I'd have the pig roast available. I'd have the burgers. I'd also have the vegan burgers too, because we have a lot of vegans and vegetarians. So we have to sort of cater to all needs. But we'll have the barbecue in our backyard, bring everybody together, have some cold beers, and figure this all out. Now, again, we can't do any of this, though, until all the frickin' snow melts. But soon enough, I promise you. All right, until next time, and may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives and nurture love in your hearts, and give those who are hurting a hug. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.